either of them can request the court for a hearing. Sometimes the court will automatically set a hearing, especially when there's children involved. There are certain rules that are applicable to protective orders. For example, a protective order is in addition to, it is not instead of. For example, if there's a divorce matter where the court says, well, I don't want you to have contact with your child, or I don't want you to have contact with your spouse for this amount of time. This is in addition to that. Also in criminal court, there's no contact orders. This is in addition to it. It's not instead of. So a victim is not barred from seeking a protective order because of any other type of proceeding with the respondent. And also the court can't delay the granting of the order just because there may be another pending case. Also, let's say that there's a divorce matter pending, and then there is abuse that happened, and the victim applies for petitions for protective order. The court then has to consider that petition before they transfer it out, and normally they grant it for maybe 30 days until the other court can set a hearing for that matter. The court can grant an ex parte order, as I stated before, and without a hearing, and they can remove the respondent from the house. They can order possession of the residence, automobile, cars, vehicles, any belongings, no matter who owns it. So if the respondent is the actual owner of the resident or of the vehicle, the petitioner can still have access to that. Also, in most cases, law enforcement officer does take the petitioner or the respondent sometimes to the home to get those belongings. Yes.
In the couple slides before that, so a protective order or protection order kind of trumps like an order for visitation through a divorce proceeding until the court that has divorce proceedings going on or whatever.
Yes, but normally in a situation like that is that the court will maybe grant the ex parte order temporarily and get them in for a hearing so that they can discuss those issues.
Okay. So
it does trump it because it's an emergency proceeding.
Yes. If a hearing is set, the court can then order specific parenting time with the children, whether it's supervised or not. So a lot of the times I know that I have victims that really want the father to see their children, and they don't want it to be supervised as long as they have not been abused with the children. So there's a way that you can set that up where they just can't communicate with each other, but the perpetrator can still see the children. The court can deny parenting time. The court can also order attorney's fees, order the respondent to pay child support, to pay mortgage, medical expenses, anything that came out of the abuse that occurred, the court can absolutely order him to pay it. Also, the court can prohibit a respondent from using or possessing a firearm, ammunition, or deadly weapon. So if there's a knife or any other type of weapon that he's used, the court can absolutely prohibit the respondent from using it, and also the court can order him to surrender it. Let's say the petitioner no longer wants the protective order. Well, she or he needs to request to the court to dismiss it before they can have contact. And if they don't, then the respondent then is in violation and can be arrested and be held in contempt. The protective orders normally last about 2 years unless it's otherwise specified by the court. And these are some of the resources that are available for help. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of victims advocates that I see here that help in filling out the petitions. I specifically help women who speak Spanish, and there are services where, or there are resources where there are victims advocates that speak all kinds of languages that would be available to the victims. The Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Julian Center, the Latino Coalition are all great places here in Indiana to help the victims. And also there are self-service pro se forms, and they're very detailed in instructions, and I actually did copy some if anyone is interested. I have some copies up here for the petition and the sample orders of what the court actually does issue. And I think Sidra will pass those out.
I think you have a question.
Does anyone have any questions about, I'm sorry, I kind of try to fly through it because we're almost out of time. Yes?
Can you explain what it means to go from a protection order to a restraining order in the divorce hearing?
Well, are you talking about restraining order of assets, or?
Does the restraining order have anything to do with the protection order that you just discussed?
No. This protective order is for the safety of a victim that has been a victim of family or sexual violence. So a restraining order normally in a family proceeding is usually a restraining order on assets, which means that they can't sell or get rid of certain property.
And what can happen is that the part of the reason for that is that the evolution, basically protection orders were developed to protect safety. The restraining orders in a family court case are more property oriented, and part of the difference is when you look at the laws in most states, and it sounds like Indiana's like that, your protection order has a whole legal enforcement mechanism, including police and things like that, that the family court order does not.
Right. Yes.
Protection orders, are they being monitored as of today?
In what way?
And when the victim applies for protection order or restraining order, do they go back and monitor the abusers to see if there is consistency or violation of the protective order or anything?
No, not unless there's a complaint. Then if there's a complaint against the petitioner, then the police will go and pick up the respondent and arrest him.
Right, the victim has to self-enforce.
Yes. Yes.
How much burden is there for an owner? Like if the petitioner or they're not, they weren't like boyfriend, girlfriend.
Okay. And what was your question? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Burden of proof.
What is the more likely than not? So the court, what they do mainly, they take testimony. A lot of times there's not a lot of physical evidence of any abuse. There may be pictures sometimes, maybe there's not a lot. Sometimes victims don't call the police. They just decide, I don't want this anymore, and they go and file a protective order without even calling the police. So there may not be a lot of actual physical evidence, but they do take the testimony. In the petition itself, you have to state the different incidents that have happened, and so more likely than not is the easier way to explain it to you.
If I could just amplify that, what I'd say is a lot of times when you're working with victims from foreign countries, it's hard for them to believe that their testimony is evidence. And so one of the things that happens here is when you say you're going to go to protection order court and you're going to tell your judge a story, and he's going to be there potentially and tell the judge his story, it's hard for the victims to believe that she'll be believed. So part of our work is to get them to understand, because when they don't think they're going to be believed, they're going to sound less credible because they don't believe in it. So it's important in supporting victims who can do this, that if they might have to talk to the judge, they be prepared and kind of ready to go, and that they think it's really possible. I don't know why this is doing this. Sorry.
Sure. And I know what you're talking about. Technically, they can be detained because it has not been filed yet. But it's something that if they are detained and it is filed, it's something that would be able to get worked out. Unfortunately.
I have a question for either you or Leslie. You talked a lot about the effect on the victim's status for divorce, but would annulment be the same effect?
I actually can answer that.
Sure.
One of the great things DHS did a long time ago in implementing, actually INS in implementing the regulations, is as to VAWA, let's say Violence Against Women Act cases, because a lot of guys would come in and seek annulment to be able to cut her off from the immigration relief. And what they basically did was say termination of the marriage. It's not affected by termination of the marriage, legal termination, so it doesn't actually really matter whether it's divorce or annulment. However, if it's annulment, he can try to get DHS, the immigration enforcement side of the Department of Homeland Security, to go after her for marriage fraud. So you don't want to cave into an annulment, you want to try to convert it into a divorce, if you are able to do that.
But also, in that situation, even if their marriage is annulled, for example, a U visa is still going to be an option for them instead of VAWA, because U visa is a victim of a crime. It is not, like Leslie said earlier, it's not attached to the relationship. I think yes.
Someone who does have a visa, they become eligible for public services?
We're going to have a whole session on this tomorrow morning. The question was, if you have a U visa, you're eligible for public services. The short answer is they're eligible for the same thing. There's lots of publicly funded services that we'll be talking about tomorrow morning that undocumented people are eligible for. But whether or not they get anything, they don't get federal public benefits, and whether they get anything in addition, like in between, depends on the state, and Indiana doesn't provide anything. So in Indiana, you don't have a set of state benefits to go to, but for health care, for example, and we'll be talking about this more tomorrow, you can get, you can get health services from publicly funded, or you have a hospital in town that provides services to people that are undocumented, and any federal qualified health center. So if you go to the HRSA, HRSA website.gov, HRSA.gov at Department of Health and Human Services, you put in your zip code and it'll tell you all of the health centers in your zip code area that are required to provide health care to people without regard to immigration status.
And also remember that they're victims, that a lot of this money can be retrieved again from the perpetrator through a court order, and there's also other help available for victims as well, that's outside from the regular benefits that people would receive.
I mean, victims of domestic violence who get a protection order, you can get child support included, and you can even get child support if she's undocumented, he's undocumented, or she's undocumented and he's a citizen. You can get support orders, and the courts will make them pay too.
Yep. You had a question?
One thing I do see as a victim advocate are people that get protective orders, and they're under the impression that it's effective as soon as they walk out the door, but they don't understand that it's not valid until the respondent is personally served with that.
Right.
Now, in saying that, I have known that some counties think that service is leaving it out the door from where the respondent lives, and that we can't prosecute that as being served.
Right.
Personally sign off on it. And
Right.
that's an issue that victims don't understand.
Right, and you're talking from a prosecutor's perspective, that it's important for all of us working with victims to make sure, if we help the victim get those orders, that we make sure it gets served and that he really knows about it. Yeah.
They serve within 72 hours, and I always tell the victims that if you see the service, they come to the house all day long. If the officer catches them there, they can be served, they know that there's a session.
Right.
Lisa?
Sometimes they don't have that.
Right, you can help them, call 911 and try to help get it served, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to know if every county in Indiana is supposed to be using the same paperwork for people to be able to file those taxes. Because I had a situation in another county where
Well, I do know that the forms that I have here and that are on the website is for the whole state of Indiana. Now, it doesn't mean that every county has their own court rules. So it's very important that whoever is practicing in that area are familiar with what additional rules they may require in that county.
So it's okay for them to require each county to have different rules about how we file protection?
Well, it shouldn't be too different from the statewide rule. It should be maybe a couple things that are in addition to, but I mean, maybe we can talk later and you can tell me specifically and we can work through it.
And also what's important is everybody who comes to file should be treated the same, so it's not okay to treat an immigrant victim or somebody who doesn't speak English differently than somebody who speaks English. We'll be talking about that more tomorrow, too.
And we should talk, Lisa, because I'd like to know what specifically they were asking from them.
You might talk more about this tomorrow, but can you tell me about housing, like if they're not resident, what happens to them?
The question is about housing. Again, we're going to talk about this in detail tomorrow. But undocumented immigrants have a federal legal right to have access to emergency shelter and transitional housing for up to 2 years. Beyond that, VAWA self-petitioners, VAWA cancellation of removal, people who have cases before the immigration judge for domestic violence-related kinds of cases, and VAWA self-petitioners and their children have a federal legal right to access public and assisted housing. Although the paperwork end of the implementation of that is not as good as it should be. We've been battling with HUD on and off with this since 1996.
The availability too.
Well, as a practical matter, the cases on housing, you're going to see more of where she's getting a protection order to kick him out of public housing and she wants to stay in the unit because of the waiting list. I mean, VAWA self-petitioners can get on the waiting list, which might ultimately be fine, but the waiting lists are long.
Yeah. Any other? Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. I have to go back to this monitoring thing, because it's really bothering me. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and whether you're immigrant or non-immigrant, why is it not that these perpetrators are not being monitored? I mean,
Why are the protection orders not monitored in the same way like the criminal cases are?
yeah.
Well, I mean, because it's not a criminal protective order. It is a civil protective order.
Can it be interpreted as being criminal because
Criminal protection order is usually the order that is issued as part of a criminal case, and it's in effect only as long as the criminal case exists. So if it's dismissed, the order goes away. And so, go ahead.
No, sorry.
Go ahead.
It is important that if something happens, that the victim calls the police, because that's when it becomes a criminal matter, and that's when they will have to be monitored. And a lot of times, they'll be arrested and may not be able to be bonded out.
Right, so that the crime of violating the protection order triggers the criminal process by which you'd get monitoring, potentially.
I just want to be clear, you actually don't get monitoring for criminal either. I mean, if say the domestic battery charge is filed, there's a criminal no contact order, which is very similar to the civil contact order. If that's in place, there's still the police are not going to be going out there monitoring. So I don't want to think
Yeah.
the only time that we can get monitoring from a vendor is potentially as part of the criminal sentence, if one
Right.
as a monitor, and then the offender is monitored, there it goes. But before that, and I quite frankly, I suspect a lot of them would rather resources.
Right.
These officers who go out and watch people, make sure they're not violating orders. Just the number of orders that are issued.
I mean, one of the things that I might add is, I don't know, I have to ask you in Indiana what's happening, but I know where I work in DC, there are ways to put your location, like your house, on a special lookout list for the police. It's not monitoring per se of the abuser, but there are local police departments can do that as a way to get some protection, but it's not a guarantee.
Then there's also the issue where, if it's an apartment complex. You know, it's public access, it's public roadway.
Right.
I mean, it's that fine line between, is he just walking home, or is he actually, you know, I mean, until he actually does something, says something, or threatens it anyway, there's really no enforcement. I mean, he's not doing anything violent.
Right.
He's just walking down the street.
Well, and he can't, or he or she can't have any contact with the victim whatsoever, through a third party, through sending flowers, through whatever means, he can't communicate with you. So in the event that he does, even through another person, he's gonna be arrested.
I want to talk about monitoring at international level. I do know certain cases where this man got married. I'm talking about India, when man got married. Domestic violence, she is on welfare. He went back, got married again, same situation. These are habitual people. I don't know why there is no treaty or there is no immigration law between countries where there are repeated cases. Have to prohibit these people to go back to their homeland and with bringing more victims and putting burden on this country of having more people on welfare and all that. I have not seen anything happening.
I mean, the only thing that VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, has done in that regard is it opened up VAWA self-petitioning for unknowing spouses, second spouses or third spouses of bigamists. So in a situation where he went, brought one person, never divorced her, went back, got another person, and she believes she's married and she's not, she would still be able to VAWA self-petition. So that much we've done. But the international laws, I mean, there's very few, there's an international treaty on custody. I'm not even sure, is there one on child support? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure if there's...
I don't think there's one, I'm not sure there's child support, but there's nothing in the domestic violence field in terms of, there are big international treaties, but I'm not sure we've fully signed on to them, actually, so.
But they are American citizens, they go back over to do anything to them. Indian government is not going to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
With the protection orders that are filed here with immigrants, if the person that, they're stopped from being harassed here, but what if they're harassing the family members outside the country? Is there anything that can stop them?
Well,
I actually had one case where we did this.
okay, well, and
Go
that's
ahead.
communication through another party.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? He's trying to send a message to her.
So if in fact, like if he's calling let's say he's calling family members, he's sitting here and he's making phone calls to Guatemala. The crime is occurring, the violation of protection, both here and there, because he's making the call. And as she says, if he's doing it through someone, the trick would be proving that it's happening and getting the evidence, figuring out a way to get the evidence from that country in the court is the problem. But it's a violation of the protection order. The question is how you would enforce it.
So the protection order doesn't have like a perimeter?
The protection order has full faith and credit in every U.S. jurisdiction.
But so the fact that it's calling somewhere else, just once he gets off,
No, see, what happens is if he drags her over the border into Mexico and beats her up and brings her back, I've even had friends, allies in South Texas who will, because it's his behavior, if they're both physically in the courtroom, they could probably, I don't know if prosecutors would do it, but I've had people enforce the protection orders against the abuser through the civil system, civil or criminal contempt, for that behavior that happens a lot on the Mexican border, like he'll drag her over across the border, beat her up and bring her back. But generally speaking, they have full faith and credit within the United States, outside, and they control the behavior of the parties. And if the parties are physically in the United States, you might be able to get a protection order issued when there's been a series of events of which some happened abroad, but not if they were all abroad. Great.
would count if they both reside in the United States, even though the battery happens on
If the battering, I know the laws interstate, so for example, there have been a lot of case law about, let's say, I think one of the first cases was a New York case in the late 70s of the abuse happened in Miami, and then she fled to New York back to her family, and then he followed her, and they were able to get the protection order based on the abuse in Miami and the fact that they could serve him in New York. The problem, when you start talking about those interstate issues, is you can't get you have to use the state's long-arm statute to serve him, and so you have to get service, and if he never comes to the state, it's hard to do. That's been my experience, at least.
Yes, but in a situation like that, what you said, I mean, if the perpetrator beat her up or beat him up, whichever, probably is going to do it again. So I'm not saying that she should allow it to do it again. But, you know, something that I would be, as an attorney, would be willing to try. If he's here and he is a threat, I think that the court would absolutely consider it. The statute is not very clear on where the abuse actually had to occur. It only says that you can file as long as one of you lives in that county, or that's where the county where the abuse happened. So I think you can make an argument that he's still a threat to her or him.
And the laws nationally are pretty clear on that in between states, it's like you can get a protection of where the abuse occurred or where the victim is, or even where the perpetrator is, I think. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Break. I know it's not intended, but they're in time. So 2 minutes and we'll come back.
Your presentation wasn't, it is in the city?
What? I'm sorry.
Your presentation, it is in the city?
Yes.
Because I was
It's
saying
not
that.
on the CD. No, actually,
give me yours. That's great. I'll give you that. I have a
This is before I moved to Indianapolis, but I wrote my...
Oh, good.
Sure. Sure, no problem. You said for networking. Yeah.
Here. And if I could have yours, that'd be great. Sure. And I wanted to ask you those cases. I'm not an attorney, but as I work with them, because the one you said that was in Missouri.
Maria Luis, if you go to our website, I'm not sure. It's Maria Luis is the published case of Nebraska from Nebraska Supreme Court. Maria Luis, that's the woman. And I think if you type in Nebraska,
I have spent the last week, and I'm not an attorney, so I don't know. I just look online and stuff because we have a few cases in our termination. Yeah.
Write that you want the appeal, and I'll send it to you. There's a Missouri Supreme Court. Huh?
Opinion?
Yeah, just read the Nebraska opinion. Nebraska
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay. And the other one's Missouri. This Missouri one is still pending?
It's at the court, it's the Supreme Court, I'm not sure. It's sealed, I don't know if it's recorded or not. The language is fantastic. I'll get you both if I have it.
Thanks so very much. Appreciate it.
This is a personal thing, and I never thought when I first met you I would ever ask this. Let's just say a person had a 23-year-old daughter who fell in love with a handsome young man from New York. Turns out he's from Trinidad. His mother brought him here when he was a little boy. He's raised in New York.
Right.
Handsome as all get. I'm hearing about this third hand. I'm not really supposed to know all this. His mother, I think he has a green card.
Yeah.
He's married someone to stay here. He's not with her. He and my daughter are very much in love.
What I would, I'm not asking immigration work, but what I would say
Doesn't that put him in jeopardy?
no, it can be a legitimate right. People divorce all the time.
Okay, he gets it.
He has to get divorced.
and then he goes forward on this. And you can't undo their thought. That's what it was.
But, okay, he has a green card, and my daughter said it has a date, like it expires July of 11.
Well, no, what happens is his green card, he has a full, does he have a green card that is 2 years after or 10 years after? That's the question you want to ask.
It would have to be 2 years because he's 27. I mean, he didn't get married when he was 17.
Well, then what happened, here's what would happen. And actually, this is the best thing that could happen. If at the end of 2 years, well, no, here's the issue. You have to figure out, he needs to get to the immigration order because the issue is he should file for divorce and then file a waiver of conditions based on the divorce. And he's going to have to prove that it's a legitimate marriage. And if he can't do that, but if he can't prove that it's a legitimate marriage, then he really needs to go to immigration order because what happens is if that case disappears, one idea is he leaves the country and comes back in as her fiance. And then she can marry him and he's good to go. The problem though is as soon as he files something, they're going to see the file of marriage. You need to get immigration order.
Which he doesn't have.
Where is he? New York City?
No, he's here in Indiana. He's working at Fry's Electric. He's not going
Okay,
to
so
have money.
what I would do is ask Michelle when you see her later. You should recommend.
Okay.
I mean, there's a slide in this field. You need a decent immigration order because this could be very complicated. Because it's marriage fraud, and you need somebody who can figure out how to pull this off without triggering the marriage fraud.
It's so unfair. He's been here all his life.
How many years?
I think he came when he was just like a toddler. I mean, he went all through the New York school system.
Here's the issue. Here's what I would do. Okay. Right from the beginning. Well, a phone number. Call my immigration attorney tomorrow.
Okay.
And tell her about the case over the top. And, tell her what the son of Samira.
Okay, I remember
Yeah, call Samira and ask her, just say, how would you handle this? She knows a lot more about this.
Okay.
And we can get you to an immigration lawyer. Very soon.
Should we just work locally?
Well, yeah, but you gotta get a good lawyer. You have to get someone who's really good.
And this is going to scare him because, he has no money and he feels like he's done something illegal.
Well, that's why I'm saying, here's the issue. Were they dating? Was there any relationship?
I think so. He lived there for a while.
Oh, so they got married and they lived
She's
together.
here. She has a baby and a boyfriend. I don't know if they paid her. That's what brought him out here from New York. So maybe he could show Sharon a dress or something.
You need a good lawyer. That's what I can tell you.
Yeah. Well, and again, I don't know the whole story.
But I would imagine that Michelle would know where there's a good immigration law. Because I think it is fixable. I just don't know.
All right.
Okay?
All right.
Good luck. No problem.
And this person has to be the
Oh my God. You don't want her to forget that.
I know. Well, I told this teacher too. I'm like, when she comes, she has to take it with her.
Yeah.
Want water? You want water?
I have water.
I'm with these all over. Good afternoon. We will go ahead and get started again. Sorry, the microphone is not cooperating right now. What? You guys hear? You guys hear all the static as well? Let me see if I can use it. Okay, is this better? Okay, our next is going to be on faith, domestic violence. Our speakers will be N Gill and myself. I will introduce Neha. She will be speaking first. She grew up in India, Mauritius, and the United States. She received her BA in International Relations from Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. She then studied International Development at the University of where she became interested in the issue of women's rights after interning for a community-based organization in Nairobi, Kenya. She has been at Upnagar since where she supervises the legal advocacy program.
Should I speak into this or?
This?
Yeah. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Like Lubaba said, my name's Neha, and I'm from Upnagar in Chicago. Upnagar means our home in Hindi and Urdu, which are the primary languages of India and Pakistan. And though the organization started out to serve South Asian women, we are now serving many, many different immigrant groups in the Chicagoland area. So I'm here to talk to you about culturally competent services, or at least the way in which we provide them. Oh, I turned it off. Sorry. This is fine.
Go back up.
Go back, yeah. Should I try this? Should I try my clicker? No, I don't know, but I don't think it's working. Yeah, that is the first slide. Yeah. But I'm not sure if this works.
Yes, that advances it, yes.
Go this way. Okay, yay, okay, thank you. So I think we're going to start then. So domestic violence, we are actually using the Sanctuary for Families definition because it kind of represents the experiences of the clients that we serve, and it is a pattern of gender-based intimate partner, dating, or family violence with a central dynamic of power and control. And it is maintained by society, culture, institutions, and laws that aren't consistent in naming it as wrong. And then within the immigrant context, and it's not exclusive to the immigrant context, but because that is the population that we serve, we also see different forms of violence such as joint or extended family violence. And that could mean that there's a situation where a family is living together with in-laws or other family members that could also be abusive. So there could be a situation of multiple abusers. And this has to do with, could also have something to do with family hierarchies and things like that. And we could talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A. So kind of want to get through the PowerPoint. But so that's actually something that we see quite often. And there's also situations of forced marriages which are different from arranged marriages sometimes, because in some arranged marriages there is a level of consent and there is an ability for people to choose partners, but forced marriage really means that there isn't that ability and they are coerced into a situation that they don't want to be in. And then obviously there's lots of incidents of, unfortunately, marital rape and sexual assault within the relationships. There's immigration-related violence, and I think some of the speakers before have spoken about that, just about how the immigration system is used against someone. There's also issues around dowry, acid attacks, which are specific to the area, but can be there could be a context in the United States that might kind of correlate. There's issues around honor, and I think that, again, we're going to maybe talk about this a little bit more in the Q&A, but issues around honor crimes and sometimes killing, which could happen from the family of the victim, actually. We have cases of people having to flee situations of female genital mutilation, trafficking, obviously, and then again, child abuse, elder abuse. There are situations that we've had to deal with where it's abortion and female infanticide, so killing fetuses or or girl children. So those are some specific forms of domestic violence that we have seen. So we feel then that services must be holistic, which means they should be comprehensive and integrated. They should be culturally and linguistically competent and fully sensitive to the unique needs of domestic violence survivors who are immigrants or who are not immigrants. And they must address all forms of abuse. And sometimes it's not possible to do all of these things within one agency, so a useful strategy for us is to partner with other agencies to create collaborations and things like that. But the idea is to make them as holistic as possible. And again, this idea of addressing all forms of violence, this lifetime spiral of gender violence was created by the Asian Pacific Islander Institute on Domestic Violence, and it is to address forms of violence across a woman's lifespan, so from infancy to when they're older. And again, it's lots of different forms of violence that, again, we could maybe talk about a little bit in the Q&A. And again, in terms of like providing culturally competent services, Sujata Warrior has done a lot of research on it, and some of the things that she has talked about is that in all culture, privilege and access are created by certain groups, and by which all other subgroups are compared. So, for example, in the U.S., the dominant culture attributes include English as a primary language, white skin, Christianity, physically able, having economic resources, being heterosexual and male. And so other cultures are obviously compared to that. But also that all cultures are contradictory in that there is widespread acceptance of domestic violence. In this culture, we know in other cultures as well, but there's also lots of traditions of resistance, and that the idea is to kind of try to tap into that with the individuals that we're working with, how they perceive it individually and what they know of in their culture. And so, again, the recommendation is that institutions should develop specific policies and procedures to build cultural competence. And that really means being aware of one's own biases, prejudices, and the knowledge of a victim. And so we really talk about this at my agency a lot of the time. So, it's about challenging our assumptions, using appropriate language, which is, being respectful, being aware of assumptions of family and other assumptions that we have ourselves. And then also it's important to recognize professional power and avoid sort of the imposition of the values that we have as an organization. So the recommendation really is to use non-judgmental, open-ended questions and provide the victim or the person seeking services to be able to narrate their own story. The other point is to not assume that people have resources. So sometimes there's a lot of people feel that they could access resources other places, and so they may turn them away. So the idea is to try to help everyone as much as you can. And then another way in which we are trying to provide culturally competent services is to be able to gather information about the victim's interpretation of her own culture. Questions like, what is it like for you to talk about this problem in your community? Or we also, we come from a strengths-based perspective, so, acknowledging that they have experienced injustice and that it does take a lot to be able to break away from their communities and some other values that they have, and to be able to come out and talk about their story. And again, of course, ensuring victim safety and self-determination. And so the safety plans also could be culturally appropriate. And I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, partnership, developing linkages within the communities that we're serving, and so that we could provide the culturally appropriate referral, and we continue to work with community-based organizations as well. And then this idea of seeing the victim in their own context, that actually is really important so that it doesn't create distance between the service provider and the victim. So my agency, the mission is to provide culturally appropriate multilingual services to South Asian and other immigrant survivors of domestic violence. Our services focus on prevention, intervention, advocacy, and outreach. And the way in which we do that, we actually have 2 programs for prevention. The Love is Not Abuse program is for teen dating violence. It was actually developed from Liz Claiborne curriculum. And then we, in the city of Chicago, the mayor's office on domestic violence has a program called Cut It Out, and they're working with salons. And so we have our own sort of version of it, and we call it Salon Solutions. We have a 24-hour crisis line. We have walk-in services. We have an emergency shelter. We provide emergency legal assistance, crisis counseling, collaborative case management, supportive services. And the shelter is per funding requirements for about 120 days, but we have actually had people stay there for about a year or so if they've needed to, just because of their immigration status and other things that are preventing them from being able to move on to the next step. And then I'm going to talk about it, but we do also have transitional housing programs that are available for up to 2 years. And again, the idea is to focus on individual empowerment, to be strengths-focused and trauma-informed, and to work with, and to individualize all the services, so to work with each individual in her full context as much as possible. So this is kind of, yeah, so this is these are all the other services that I guess I didn't mention before, but the transitional housing is for up to 2 years. We have about 7 apartments now, and we have a visitation and a safe exchange center as well, and it's one of only 3 sites, 3 free sites in Chicago. We are doing collaborative research and some policy work as well. And again, the idea there is that it's informed by the victim's experience. And the outreach that we're doing is with the goal of educating groups on the dynamics of domestic violence and the services that Upnigar offers, and to expand the cultural sensitivity of domestic violence service providers that may not be working with immigrant populations, and but also work with immigrant serving groups that may not have the domestic violence component. And then, of course, within the legal system and healthcare